Good morning, everyone. Welcome to first of our 3 webinar series on credit for prior learning. We are so delighted to have you all with us this morning. I'm going to do some brief introductions and get us started, and then we will dive right into a conversation. My name is Amanda Johansson, and I serve as the Associate Director for Adult Learning Initiatives at the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Dallas Kratzer. Dallas, you want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, that might take the whole webinar because I'm an old guy and I've been around for a little bit. I'm Dallas Kratzer. Great to be here. Thank you, Amanda, for allowing me to participate in the CPL webinar and in the work that we're trying to do here in Kentucky. I've been involved with CPL since I did my undergraduate degree way back in the day. In 94, I completed my bachelor's degree and had used the ACE credit recommendations and CLEP exams and things like that. And then when I retired from the military in 2015, after a short stint, about 35 years, I really jumped into the pool because I always wanted to do a faculty evaluation with ACE. Went off and did that, got involved with the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning, and have been going across the country teaching colleges and universities how to integrate credit for prior learning into their programs, doing portfolio assessments and such like that. So this is great to be able to get this moving in Kentucky. So looking forward to it. Lots to talk about.
Great. Yeah, so much to talk about, and we are so grateful to have your incredibly robust experience and expertise joining us to share more information about this and help educate folks. We're excited to move this initiative forward in Kentucky. So let me share the agenda for today. And actually, before I do that, just a few housekeeping items for those that are joining us live. This is a Zoom webinar, so you are muted and we won't be able to hear you, but we do have the Q&A set up. So if you do have questions that come up during our conversation today, please do click on that Q&A button and type those in. We will definitely have time at the end of our conversation to engage with you and answer those questions. Also, if they don't happen to fit in our conversation today or they merit a longer discussion, we'll make sure to pull them into our plans for the remaining 2 webinars in this series, or we're happy to connect with you one-on-one in follow-up. If you are watching the recording of this webinar, please do feel free to reach out to Dallas or I directly with any questions or discussion points that you might have about credit for prior learning. We're really excited about getting this going or taking this to the next level in Kentucky. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Those housekeeping items aside, let me go ahead and share the agenda for today's conversations. So we've already talked about who we are, and we're going to talk more about what is credit for prior learning. I'm going to share a little bit about what we know about adult learners in Kentucky and why this is an important practice for us to be aware of. And Dallas is also going to take you through a little bit about why we need to make the case for this and what the data says about credit for prior learning, about potential students being aware of it, what it means for students who bring credit for prior learning into an institution of post-secondary education, and why there's urgency around this. And then we'll wrap up with next steps, reminding you about the remaining 2 webinars in this series and hoping that you will join us for those as well. Dallas, anything else you want to share with folks before we dive in and get started?
Well, I was thinking maybe let's talk about the following 2 webinars just for a moment, because this is something that Amanda and I have been working on for a while. We think that we need to make the case first and then do a little bit deeper dive into what CPL is and how we can do it in our institutions here in Kentucky, plus find out who's already doing some amazing things, which I know there are some out there. And then as we find out more about what folks are doing, that 3rd webinar in December will be our best practices. Let's share information so we can all get better, because this is a collaborative process. We're also going to bring in some trends from across the nation on who are doing amazing things. So that's why we hope you'll be excited about this and want to come to those other 2 webinars after seeing this great webinar too.
Thanks. That's a really good point, Dallas. And we should also say that we are going to be approaching this conversation from sort of the ground up, really wanting to help introduce this concept to folks that may not be familiar with it, or help explain the concept more fully to folks that maybe have interacted with credit for prior learning in a single context, maybe through, I'm going to spoil our next slide a little bit, maybe through a CLEP exam or through GSSE, or maybe you have some experience with students who are transitioning out of the military. But we're going to be touching a little bit on all facets of it and really trying to help bring the fullness of conversation to light. That being said, these webinars are by no means exhaustive. This is a very large national conversation, and we're wanting to bring it to light in Kentucky. We'll talk a little bit more about our next steps for creating that community at the end, but really excited to scratch the surface today. So with all that said, Dallas, I'll hand it over to you to walk us through what the heck is credit for prior learning, at least a little bit, and then I'll talk through some of the data.
Sure. This is a simple definition from the Council on Adult and Experiential Learning, CAEL. CAEL is the national leader in the whole thought process of how we recognize and award credit for prior learning. And this rolls into the concept of the lifelong learner, that there are many things that we learn outside of the classroom that we need to recognize and evaluate to see if there might be college equivalent learning that could be awarded as credit. Now, the thing with this is there are lots of different ways to do credit for prior learning, and many of our institutions are already doing it because, as you see in the definition, it does say various methods. Many schools accept CLEP, Dante's, AP exams. Those are all types of credit for prior learning. What we're also wanting to do is to expand that out. Many of our schools, because of legislative action, do accept the military credit recommendations from the American Council on Education, but there are also other things that can be done, such as the portfolio, which is another element of credit for prior learning. It's a little bit more rigorous, it takes a little bit more work, so we will talk about that also, but it all comes together. It's the learning that happens outside of the classroom that we can evaluate and put a credit recommendation on. And I think this is going to be incredibly important, particularly in workforce, as we reach out to employers and we say, let's evaluate your learning that's going on there and see how we might be able to award credit. All right.
Yeah, great, Dallas. I appreciate that. And it's so helpful. I think I really internalize this in kind of two ways that this is operationalized by our institutions. One is where the institutions themselves are doing the assessment, and one is where they are doing the awarding of credit. And in many cases, they're doing both. But for something like a CLEP exam or an AP exam or a standardized exam, that is the assessment method, right? There is an external partner to an institution that is assessing a learner's knowledge, and then the institution's responsibility is to translate the score or the results of that assessment into how they're going to award that credit. And then there are other types of credit for prior learning where the institution actually conducts the assessment. So something like a portfolio or a challenge exam, those are places where the institution is responsible for both parts of that process. We'll talk more about this in our next webinar, but that is a helpful way that I have framed the various methods of credit for prior learning.
That's a great way to do it too, because it helps us to think about our role, their role, industry's role. And as we continue to work through this, I think folks will see it just blossom into what full recognition is and the benefit. I mean, this is going to really have the potential to bring more students to our colleges and universities, which also then changes our communities because of the level of education that's out there. So I'm very excited about this.
It's such a great transition, Dallas, because I want to take a step back from diving specifically into credit for prior learning and talk a little bit about adults and education in Kentucky, about why this is important. So I do want to share from the perspective of the council, from the state, why is it that focusing on getting adults credit for their life experiences or their college level learning that has taken place outside of a college institution, why that's important. The Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education has set the strategic agenda for higher education in the state. Our current strategic agenda runs from 2022 to 2030. And one of the specific charges that we have in the strategic agenda under the success umbrella is to work with education providers to limit barriers to enrollment and completion for adult learners and other students balancing the competing demands of work, life, family, and school. That is a really large charge, but one small subset of that is helping adult learners enter post-secondary education for the first time or re-enter it, but acknowledging where they have come from and making sure that we are awarding credit for the experiences that they have. We'll talk a lot about this idea of awarding credit for experience because it's not quite as mushy as it may seem from the outside. It's really, as Dallas said, college level learning that has taken place outside of a classroom. So that is definitely an act to reduce barriers to enrollment, to help folks come in recognition of where they truly are in their learning and progression towards a degree or credential. So this is why it fits into our overall strategic work as a state. I do also want to share, just for folks' background, a little bit about who adult learners are in the state of Kentucky. And for the purposes of adult learners, just for definitions today, we're talking about folks that are engaged in post-secondary education that are over the age of 25. The majority of those learners are younger adult, female. They are disproportionately underrepresented minorities and more likely to attend part-time. They are, many of them are low income, and almost most, about half, have dependent children. And this is a decreasing segment of our population of those engaged in higher education in Kentucky. And that's really why we're focused on this. We want to make sure that the engagement that we see with higher education is not reflective of barriers that we might be unintentionally putting up, or places that we're not meeting prospective learners where they are, and that our doors are truly open to adults in Kentucky so that they can engage with institutions of post-secondary education to gain social mobility and, of course, the ability to earn a living wage for themselves and their families. Just quickly wanted to illustrate that trend that I spoke about, where the proportion of learners who are adults has really dramatically decreased over time. So you're seeing on my screen the overall enrollment by sector across Kentucky of adults. So of course, most adults in Kentucky enroll in QCTCS institutions in our community and technical college system, which makes complete sense as they offer a really wide variety of degrees and credentials. But the proportion across all sectors of adult learner enrollment has decreased. So it's not something we're seeing in just one area. It's definitely a trend we're seeing over time. And just one more data point I want to say about this before we dive back into the conversation about credit for prior learning. I want to talk about the distribution of adult learners and their experience and by age. The reason I want to show this is because credit for prior learning is a great mechanism by which, like I've mentioned, we're recognizing the experience of adults as they might enter post-secondary institutions. And there's a lot of experience held out there, and that's really what I wanted to show. So if we look at adult prospective learners in the state of Kentucky, so these are folks that are not currently engaged in our institutions of post-secondary education, you can see their distribution across age bands. So most folks that are engaged with us are in that younger band, but you can see the incredibly sizable populations of folks that are not engaged with post-secondary education and the amount of education that they have. So the high school or equivalent, some college no degree, and those that hold an associate's degree. We're interested in serving these folks because we want to help them get towards those careers, that living wage, and that place where maybe they're achieving something that is a personal milestone and important to them. There's lots of different reasons adults re-enroll in college, but we're really wanting to make sure it's available and inviting for those folks.
Yeah, I think this particular slide really speaks volumes to us because there is a huge population that we're not even thinking about. We need to engage this. This is how we make the difference for our workforce. And we talk about non-traditional students or adult learners, but even more of those young folks, as we'll talk about shortly, are going straight from high school into the workforce with different certificates and degrees or credentials. How do we get them back into the college environment to complete that degree? Because certificates are great, okay, but they do not help you as you move up the ladder. They get you in the door, but they don't necessarily move you up through the organization.
Definitely. And we want to offer the potential, like we've talked about, for that social mobility. And of course, just that ability to earn that sustaining wage for folks. And oftentimes they may be further towards that degree or credential than they realize. If you look at the distribution of folks on the screen, that's a lot of experience held by a lot of folks. That may also include formalized workplace training. It may include military experience. There's lots of different ways that folks gain experience, college level learning outside of college classroom. And these folks may be further towards goals that they have or degrees or credentials that can help them than they realize. And that really brings us back to why we're here today and talking about how we can really expand credit for prior learning.
Sure. And a lot of these folks don't realize that they have that opportunity. Many of them would be first generation students, as we see here. Just a little bit about my story. Or my area of interest is with veterans. And as a young military person, I found out that I could do this college thing through some of the workplace learning that I had with the military, but also just because of the things I had learned in life. We can recognize that credit and really opens up the door. So, which leads right into our next slide. Why? Let's make the case for why we need to do this. Well, ACE or CAEL has done some great research. I'm a CAEL ambassador. I do work with CAEL on a regular basis, and a CAEL ambassador simply means I said, hey, I like what you're doing. I'd love to help out more. It's a volunteer type of thing. But I really believe that they have the right approach to engaging adult learners. Or the other term that we can use, and this is an ACE term, the American Council on Education, post-traditional, because yes, the adult learner goes from 25 and up, but we're starting to see a lot of young folks under 25 that are 18 that are doing dual credit. They are taking certificates. And so they are post-traditional, just as it is post-secondary. So we need to engage all of that. But the big thing that we're finding that these potential students, that big number that we see out there, know about CPL. They know there's something that they can do to get credit recognized. And you can see here, based on the income levels, the level of familiarity with this whole idea of credit for prior learning. The more money they're making, the more connected they are. And I think that's because the workplace is really starting to ramp that up, saying, hey, you need education. We're going to pay for you to go to these certain courses so that you can get more education, but it can also apply to degree completion, right?
And I think too, Dallas, of course, we know that folks who are part of higher income households are more likely to be part of generational experiences with higher education, and they may be more familiar with higher education in general. And one thing I wanted to note about this survey is that it talks about being familiar with the concept of credit for prior learning. And I think that's really important to note, because I think that the term credit for prior learning, or as many folks may have encountered this, and it's like previous iteration prior learning assessment, PLA, right. Our new preferred pronouns are credit for prior learning. Right. Students don't know that term. They don't know that umbrella or all the different components that are part of it. What they may be familiar with is the concept of it, that there is a way to earn credit for knowledge that they already have. So I think that's important to internalize from this survey. Is it's not that like you could go out there and talk with prospective students and they're going to know what CPL is. They're going to understand the concept for the most part, and you can see the distribution by income brackets, but there is a general understanding that there is something here.
And that's a great point. There is something out there. They just don't know how it applies or if it applies to them. But once they start seeing it, then they're like, okay, this is what I do. I've done portfolio classes for many years, and it's just amazing how many folks, when you say, oh, you do presentations and you've done this for years and you've gotten better at it and you've learned and you've done some studying. Maybe you went to an organization like Toastmasters, and you can take all of that and create a portfolio that would be something that would be equivalent to business communication because of the elements that go into that. And that makes you college credit worthy. That means you are a college student. They go, wow, I never thought of myself as a college student. And it just opens the door, and then they do great things. It's an amazing result once they jump in.
We're going to talk more about that in just a minute because there's
Yeah.
an amazing study that talks about the results for students and to our institutions
Sure.
when we do engage them with credit for prior learning. But let's continue in this vein of understanding with our potential students before we get to that. So not just knowledge of the concept of CPL, but also the study talks a little bit more about their intent to use it, right, Dallas?
That's right. So in this study, you can see it there on the left side of your screen. They found that significant numbers of adult learners were not only knowledgeable of it, but they were either using it or would use it in their degree completion. So yes, they want to engage, and this will lead into the next slide. Not only do they want to engage, they know about it, they want to learn more about it. Once they learn, they are then influenced by that to the choices that they make for the schools that they'll go to. So anything else that we need to talk about on this one? They plan to use it. The number that do not plan to use it is incredibly small because they see
I think that's such a good, it's so worth noting that like the magnitude of the top two stacked bars is almost all students, right? Almost all students that they surveyed either knew about CPL and planned to use it or apply for it in the future, or if they were just being introduced to the concept of it, an additional, 50 or so % of the students said, hey, actually, now that I know about it, I plan to apply for CPL in the future in some way, shape, or form. So I think this really just goes to show that it's an attractive concept to adult learners who are interested in being recognized for what they know and helping to really pick up their education where they actually are and not having to repeat anything they feel like they already know.
Exactly. So let's go there for just a moment. When we recognize the value of learning that goes on in the workplace, this adds credibility to what we're saying. All right, as academics, as faculty members, we're saying, you know what, the teaching that we have in our institutions is being used in the workforce, and we need to continue that. And yes, some of you are going to be exposed to that, and then you're going to say, hey, I've already had that level of learning. Would you recognize what I'm doing? Now, let's get to terminology. Terminology is incredibly important here. And Amanda, you've heard me say this many times. We do not give credit. Okay. This is credit that's already been earned because they did the work and they can prove that they did the work to where we should award or recognize their learning. I think that's probably one of the bigger challenges for our institutions is many of our faculty see this as giving. All right. We're giving away something for free. No. We need to set up programs that are have the depth, breadth, and rigor of our traditional classes, learning outcomes and such like that. That's what we do to assess the learning. Use those same criteria to determine if it is that level, because we don't want to water down what we do at the institutions, at our colleges and universities. We want to reinforce it and saying, yes, it is being applied in the workforce, and we can recognize that, which then allows us to accelerate people to degree completion. This is not about being quicker, okay? It accelerates. It helps them to move back into it because CPL attracts students, and that's what we want to do. These are people who would not come back into our institutions because we would say, oh, you have to do this class that you already know about. You've already been doing it. And they're like, why do I need this? I've already accomplished this learning. Well, let's recognize that and apply it. Okay.
And I want to take a minute too, Dallas, to talk about if this sounds really familiar, it also fits so nicely under the umbrella of competency-based education.
Oh, sure.
As our institutions begin to really think about helping students pace and move through education at their own rate, at their own pace, credit for prior learning is helping them enter a competency-based education pathway at the point that is commensurate with their experience and their learning. So it really fits nicely under this continuum and this idea of being able to actually pace students through a college education at their own speed, right? If instead of having every student engage with a 4-year degree in a 16-week semester, if we can actually, meet students where maybe they are with their life experience moving through that baccalaureate degree or that associate's degree or that diploma or credential at the pace that they want, it really requires recognizing where they start. And that is not that every student is starting at the beginning. Some are starting a little bit further along, some are starting at the beginning.
Right.
And that's really what we're talking about.
Sure is, because it's not them fitting into our box. It's us recognizing how their life is diverse and we need to accommodate them.
I love it.
All right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how the availability of credit for prior learning influences student choice.
Sure. This is significant. Schools who understand and apply CPL effectively will attract students. This is what we need to do in Kentucky. We have some wonderful lights out there of folks that are doing it well, okay? But we need to get better. We need to be able to attract more students, because there are others who are attracting them away from us, and that's not good. Because if they attract them away from us, then those are resources that we've lost. You know, for years we've talked about the brain drain that goes on. People come to Kentucky, get their education, but go somewhere else to work. You know, and it's typically Kentuckians going out of state to work somewhere else. Well, we need to have institutions that once they complete their degree, they want to stay here and continue to work for us. This is how we align it to workforce, to make it a collaborative effort. And back when I was doing my terminal degree, that was the focus that I saw. We need to engage business, state, and education to attract and retain students in our area. All right. You can see here, the numbers are evident. And this was from the study that they did with 72 different institutions to see how does this attract students. The majority of them, if they see that the school has a solid credit for prior learning program, they're attracted to that. So we need to think about, how do we advertise? How do we talk about it? This is, again, one of those big challenges. There are many schools that are doing it, but they don't tell people they're doing it. They don't know how to say they're doing it, or they're only doing a small part of that. And our next webinar, we're going to dig deep into what is CPL, the different umbrellas, as you mentioned, the different aspects under that one big umbrella, so that we can help schools to make the case for why students need to be engaged with them.
And I think the other part of that is including this in the admissions and the recruiting process. Oftentimes, students may not find out about credit for prior learning until, you know, maybe later in the process. Sometimes they don't find out about it until they're trying to actually complete their degree. Like at the end of it, maybe they're a credit short, and that's when someone mentions, hey, did you know there's actually credit for prior learning options? But really, it can be best, I think, integrated into the student life cycle when it's talked about at the first point, where adults are really engaging with institutions for the first time, so that they can have an informed opportunity to understand how institutions are going to recognize their experience and their learning differently.
Right. Great point. When we have a school system that is a school culture that is focused on revealing credit for prior learning, that makes a huge difference. And then as those students come in, those potential students come in, they will talk in their workplace and they will say, this is how I'm using my work to complete my degree. And then it becomes a force multiplier, right? But the culture of the institution is so significant. ACE did a charting the path for institutions report back in 2015. And in there, the biggest challenge was the institutional culture in relationship to CPL. And that as that improved, it opened up more doors. And we help our students become ambassadors for us to other adults.
And I think that institutional culture is really important also to hit on, because I think a strong CPL program is most likely to be found in an institution that has a robust suite of services for adult learners. This is not the only thing that all of the different types of folks we've been talking about seeking to engage post-secondary education, either again or for the first time in their life. It's not the only thing that they need, and it's not the only thing that's going to attract them to an institution. We certainly need to be thinking about this in the context of really robust advising, really robust career advising, if a student doesn't have a clear place they're trying to go, or doesn't know how to access the resources for what comes next in their career. Academic support services that are available for adult learners, so that are not only available during business hours on campus. Same with access to financial aid counseling. I could go on all day about this, but I think I just wanted to leave it there and mention that credit for prior learning is an exceptional practice, but it's just one of many things that adult learners really need institutions of post-secondary education to really think about as they engage this group.
Yeah, let me throw one more thing in there too. When I was doing my research, I found several reports that validated that if a parent has a degree, the child is more likely to go and complete a degree. This is significant. If we want to create pathways to education through family activities, this is the way to do it. I love Gear Up. Gear Up is a great program, but we need to invest in the parents of eighth graders and help them complete their degree. And then their eighth grader will see the value and come and complete. So again, back to being a force multiplier. And I've seen this in my own life. You've heard my story. I was 33 when I completed my bachelor's degree. Two boys in the audience, 12 and 9, saw me walk across the stage and they're like, "Dad, we're doing it different." And those two boys, now one is a lawyer and the other has a doctorate in ministry. So I have my sinister and my minister. And they they did it differently. They went right into a 4-year institution, completed their degree, one in 4 years, the other in 4.5 years, because they saw what I accomplished and they saw how it changed our world.
And we hear this from adult learners, not just in Kentucky, but the national literature really backs this up, that one of the main reasons why adult learners do seek to go back to college and complete their degree or credential is to be a role model to their own children and to show them that it's possible, that it's doable, that it's attainable and achievable for them. And I just find that so motivating. But I want to talk also about the actual numerical and return on investment benefits to students who engage in credit for prior learning, because I think it's also important to note that we're not just talking about sort of a societal benefit or something that's good to engage adult learners, or it's good to recognize where they are just because that, is us being benevolent and not wanting them to retake a class that they've already taken. It's actually good numerically for students and for institutions to recognize credit for prior learning where it is appropriate. And I'm a huge fan of this study by Kale because it really talks about that ROI.
It does. And this is just not pie in the sky. We've got the data to back this up, that this is important and valuable and provides results. These results have been measured not only by Kale, not only by Strata, but by Lumina, by academics all across the country, around the world, that if people have credit for prior learning, they're more likely to complete their degree. Look at that, 49% complete their degree, over 27% that don't have it. And this is where, when we read surveys or research reports that say, credit students that get credit for prior learning, or PLA as it's listed here, and this was a little bit older before we went to the credit for prior learning, which was just in 2021, 22 that we started saying it that way. But they complete, well, that completion also means they take more credit. They take more courses because they don't stop out. They stay and they persist. So it is significant when we recognize. But look at that last part of that first big bullet there. 11% of adults, 1 in 10, know about it. All right. That number is growing. We're 3 years after this. The pandemic, COVID really helped people to start learning about what CPL is and how it can be used. But there's still a large population that's not familiar with it, and we need to help to grow that also. The second bullet there, the diversity, 24% of those of Hispanic background engage in credit for prior learning, use that to complete their degree. This is a game changer in the diversity area and how we can attract more students into what we're doing. But it's not just ethnic background, it's also age related. How many people do we see doing credit for prior learning that are older, but still valuable? Okay. I'm 61. I'm not ready to sit on the porch forever. Okay. We still have much to offer, and CPL will allow us to bring those folks into a new and exciting way of looking at life. When I did my doctoral studies, one of my uh, one of the members of my cohort, she was 70 completing her bachelor's degree or her doctoral degree because she still had more to give. And that's just awesome. My wife, 49, when she first went to college and to become a nurse, she's still nursing. She loves it. She has no intention of getting out of nursing. So we can engage that diverse population of older adults to be more involved. All right. Um, you got anything you want to add into that? I mean, I'm rattling here. It's fun stuff.
No, you're doing great. I want to call attention to the second bullet, I think actually talks about the increase in completion rates for students from different
Right.
Different population buckets when they utilize PLA compared to when I think students from those same buckets did not. So you can really just see the impact to completion, especially by Pell Grant recipients, Black adults, community college students. I mean, just across the board, I think it's inspiring. It really shows us that this really can help students of all types. But I really also wanted to call attention to the very last row on this graphic, that institutions win when we award credit for prior learning as well. Because I think you mentioned earlier that we can often find skepticism amongst faculty who may feel that institutional credit is something that institutions really need to be the gatekeepers of, and that students really need to sit in college classrooms in order to gain this knowledge. We'll talk a little bit more about that and the ACE process in our next webinar to really dive into understanding how rigorous the assessment of this learning is. But when we do engage students and give that credit for prior learning, and I say give, award that credit for prior learning, institutions win too. Dallas, you mentioned earlier about how those students persist and complete at higher rates, and that translates to institutions, let's just talk business for a second, gaining more tuition fees revenue from students who are enrolling and completing degrees. So on average in this study, students who were awarded PLA or credit for prior learning took 17.6 more credits at the institutions than those that didn't. And that's really a result of those increased retention and completion rates. So students save money, but they actually spend that on completing and engaging their degree, which then comes back to them in the long run as well by their career outcomes and their mobility in the workforce. So it's really a win-win all around.
It really is. And we need to grasp that. A lot of faculty will say, well, I'm going to lose people in my seats. Well, no, actually, what's going to happen, it's going to shift. So you're going to be able to teach more of the upper level stuff. You're going to have more students there. There will still always be a population of students in those lower level classes because CPL does not cover everything. What it does is it's an entry point to attract them into or back to education. Because if we don't, that's lost revenue, period. So we will never get that. And one of the points that I like to make is it's not the input necessarily, it's the throughput and output that's most important. Because as students come in and they stop out, what are we going to do to bring them back in, to re-engage them, to bring our numbers of completers up? And as we get more completers, that generates more revenue. So it is always about the money for everything. Okay. I love to teach leadership. I do it for free sometimes, but I really like to have food with my meals. So I have to charge an hourly wage to be able to do that so I can have food with my meals. Okay. For our institutions, this is their potential way to livelihood. It will increase the number of students. They might be taking less credit overall because we're recognizing their credit for prior learning, but we will have more students completing and coming to our institutions, significantly more. Case in point, EKU, I'm going to throw out a little shout out. This is kind of a lead into our best practices in the third webinar. EKU, when they started looking at their military environment, and they changed some of their processes to better use the ACE credit recommendations. In a 3-year period, they increased the number of military engaged individuals from 1,200 to 1,700. That's 500 additional students during that 3-year period. Okay, on top of what they had seen persisting over the previous years. That is a game changer.
I love it. I'm so excited for the rest of this series where we're going to get down to brass tacks and talk a little bit more about really good, strong practice in the state and across the nation, because I think there are some really beautiful things going on here in the Commonwealth that we want to recognize, and some opportunities to grow that good practice as well. So lots more to come. We did also want to conclude our data conversation today by talking a little bit about the urgency. Why I started us off by really understanding where we are with the landscape of adults, and that it's decreasing, but that doesn't really talk about sort of the urgency around why it might be important to engage adult learners now more than at other points in our history. So Dallas is going to talk a little bit about national population trends here.
So this is a great chart that helps us to see how these numbers are going to change. If you get a chance, go out to this website. It's got you can change it by year to see how they expect the numbers to move around. This cliff that we've been talking about for years, it looks like because of the population changes in 2008, when we had the recession and such that went on, the number of births went down significantly, and it continues to trend downward. Because of that, we're going to hit this cliff where we're not going to have the population that we had before in higher education. There's just not going to be enough high school students, okay? Because that continues to decrease. We've seen birth rates going down, 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 down. That's just the nature of it, all right? This particular report talks about the fact that not only is it going down, but it's shifting. It's shifting away from some of our smaller areas or more rural areas to the more metropolitan areas. So we lose the potential high school students for those things also because of the shift for work. More high school students are going directly into work. They're moving into those areas that have the work. And there's also a great focus on micro credentials today, stackable learning to where we can get a certificate to get into a job. We see another certificate to advance, but we need to advocate that as we have these micro credentials in workforce, how do we apply them into the academic arena as well? So this is something that's ongoing. We will not be able to change this, but the one thing that will persist, babies will be born and they will go into the workforce. So there will always be a adult learner population that we can reach out to. It's untapped right now, and we just need to connect more with that. So there's a lot of concern about the cliff in 2025. Yes, we should be concerned. It's about a 15% decrease across the board. That means for some, it's going to be even more significant. And you can see here the enrollment changes for 2029. They're moving into different areas, different cities. In Kentucky, there's a potential that we're going to lose on our birth rate. We will go from about 21,000 plus down to 17,000. That's a significant reduction in the number of potential students, 4,000. Well, we can make that up with adult learners very easily, very quickly.
It's such a good point, Dallas. Yeah, and I want to also reinforce that it's not uniform across even the Commonwealth. The projected population changes look very different in our urban environments and in our rural environments. The eastern and western parts of the state look very different than the central part. So I think it's important also to recognize the local context for the institution that you're in and the projected population trends for the service area of that institution. We don't have time to go into all of that in the webinar today, but we did just want to highlight that adult learners are going to be increasingly important to our institution as the population of traditional students declines.
Yes. We've covered a lot of stuff.
Oh my gosh, we have covered a lot. We just wanted to wrap up with a couple of closing remarks here and think about the fact that this is a a movement that is gaining traction across higher education, across the country, and it's something that we here in Kentucky want to actively participate in and be thinking intentionally and mindfully about how we can grow these practices to engage adult learners.
And as we do that, it will help us as Kentucky to grow our workforce significantly. We have that big blue oval that's making a battery plant. We need people that are educated and able to fill that workforce. And that's just one initiative. There's so much more. Amazon, UPS, Humana, these huge corporations that are doing great things in Kentucky. And we have the opportunity to put Kentuckians in those businesses if they have the right education.
It's such a good point, Dallas, too, because I think one of the things I failed to mention earlier when talking about adults in the state of Kentucky is that our workforce participation rate is very low. Kentucky's workforce participation rate, which is the sort of the ratio of folks that are participating, that are looking for work or participating in the workforce in comparison to all those that might be eligible or able-bodied to participate in the workforce. We're 48th out of 50th in the last report that I saw out of the chamber. So our workforce participation rate is dramatically low, and there's a lot of things we could talk about the benefits to the individual, to the Commonwealth, to the nation when workforce participation rates are higher. So I can follow up with the resource that the chamber has come out with on this, but it's definitely something to think about, the benefits to our Commonwealth and to our society when folks are participating in work and are gaining that individual satisfaction, but also those benefits to society.
Right. There's so much more to talk about. I'm part of a veteran and transitioning service members subcommittee. We're doing an event, second annual Veteran Employment and Training Symposium at KCTCS on November 16th. We're going to bring in 200 employers and help them to see how to hire veterans. And education is a significant part of this engagement because we have service members coming out of the military guy, every year, 2,000 to 3,000 come back to Kentucky every year with their families. And we need to help get them employed, and education is the pathway to do that. Partnering with the chamber, with the KWIB, a lot of folks, KCTCS is sponsoring us. We're so excited about that because of what we can do. CPE is going to be there. How can we help employers see the connection between work and education?
I love it. And that really tees up, we didn't include that event on our slides here, but if you're interested in learning more about it, please message or connect with either Dallas or I. But also wanted to wrap up with just what's coming next and how we're going to continue this conversation. Hopefully you learned something today about why credit for prior learning is a word that maybe you heard here for the first time, why we're talking about it, why it's important, or maybe why you're seeing it in the national media, in the national press, or even if you're hearing it on advertisements from institutions. If you listen to Pandora or Spotify, you might be getting ads where they're talking about credit for prior learning that they offer. And so we wanted to help demystify that a little bit. What comes next is that we'd love to hear from you. If you are doing a practice that we talked about today, or you think your institution is doing something interesting that we might not know about, or encountering a challenge that you're having a hard time working around, or if this is all new to you and you have more questions, please drop us a line. We'd love to connect with you and continue this conversation. And we'd also like to make sure that our content for the remaining 2 webinars is well tailored to the folks that are joining us and have questions about this. So please share with us what you're doing. We will, I think you have my email from the reminder that came out about this webinar. If not, we can make sure that Dallas and my emails are easily accessible. Based on the interest in this conversation and how this goes across the fall, we're hoping to launch a community of practice around credit for prior learning starting next spring, where we will keep this conversation going, maybe form some work groups. So it's really important to us to understand where you are coming to this work from, and what your hopes are in learning this information and where you'd like to take it from here. So we will definitely be engaging with you in conversation. To that end, the conversation will continue with Dallas and I in November and December. In November, we're going to be taking a deeper operational dive into what are all these different kinds of credit for prior learning. We've talked about AP exams. We've talked about CLEP exams. We've talked about military training. We've talked about workplace training. That seems like a lot of different kinds of things. How can they possibly all be the same thing? So we'll talk a little bit more about how that all comes together and how institutions operationalize this. And then in December, we'll be talking about some of those best practices, really good work that's going on across Kentucky and across the nation. So we'd love to see you there. If you've registered for this webinar, the link is the same. You should have them all on your calendar. And if you have any issues with that, please feel free to reach out and we'll make sure to get you connected with the link.
And please invite others.
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay. I think that is it. Of course, CPE has lots of available streams about this. The link for these webinars was shared on our LinkedIn and possibly on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter, so I don't know if we put it there or not, but please feel free to connect with the council and follow all of our great resources. We will make sure, again, to share our emails as well if you don't have those, but we're so grateful for you for spending time with us in conversation today. And I'll stop sharing and we will spend a few minutes on the line if there are folks that are with us live that have questions that they'd like for us to take a stab at answering. You can use the Q&A box and we will hang out. Otherwise, we will see you guys next time in November.
Thank you.